She wore the mask not to hide, but to be seen. For 2 years, the world adored the mysterious songstress known only as Siren, her voice a raw, celestial instrument that cracked open souls. They gave her a national award for it, live on television, while her face remained a secret. But the woman beneath the porcelain, Ilara, knew a darker truth. The mask wasn't a gimmick. It was a shield forged in the fire of a single, searing humiliation. Before we dive into the story that shocked the nation, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You are about to witness a journey of betrayal and triumph so profound, you'll want to be here for every single chapter. Don't miss a moment of what comes next. The champagne was cold, a shocking slap against her warm skin. It dripped from her chin, soaking into the crisp white collar of her server's uniform. The bubbles stung her eyes, or maybe that was a tear she refused to shed. "Oops," drawled Isabella Thorne, the heiress, her voice a melody of pure, unadulterated carelessness. She didn't even look at Ilara, her focus on the tittering friends surrounding her. Clumsy me. The grand ballroom of the Thorne estate, a monument to old money and older prejudices, seemed to shrink, the gilded edges blurring through Ilara's unshed tears. The crystal chandeliers cast a light that felt accusatory. She could feel the stares of the other staff, a mixture of pity and relief that it wasn't them. This was her first night, a desperate gig to pay for a single precious studio hour. 1 hour to lay down a demo of a song she'd written, a song that held her entire heart. "Clean that up," the event manager hissed, materializing at his side, his voice low and venomous. "And try to be invisible. That's what you're paid for." Invisible. The word was a brand. Ilara, a voice that could silence rooms, was being told to be a ghost in the very house where she dreamed of owning the stage. She knelt, her knees pressing into the cold, hard marble, using a pristine white towel to soak up the golden liquid. The towel, like her dignity, was now stained. Isabella Thorne stepped over her, the delicate heel of a designer shoe missing Ilara's fingers by a millimeter. It was not an accident. As she worked, her eyes drifted to the grand piano on the stage. It was a world away from the one she practiced on in her aunt's dusty, cramped basement. What would it feel like to command that room? To have them listen, truly listen, not to the clink of glasses and empty chatter, but to the truth she could spin into melody? She finished mopping, the sweet, sour smell of champagne clinging to her. It was the scent of humiliation. But as she rose, a new scent cut through it, the waxy, promising fragrance of a burning candle on a nearby table. She looked at the flame, then at the retreating back of Isabella Thorne. A quiet, tectonic shift occurred within her. A resolve, hard and unyielding, settled in her soul. They wanted her to be invisible? Fine, but she would make them remember the ghost. What song, she wondered, could be powerful enough to haunt a woman who thought she owned the world? The basement was a sanctuary of shadows and sound. The scent of damp concrete and old wood was a stark contrast to the Thorne estate's opulent perfume. Hey, Ilara was not a servant to be spilled on. Hey, she was a creator. She sat at the old, out-of-tune upright piano, her fingers tracing the chipped ivory keys. The memory of the champagne felt like a phantom chill on her skin. But it was no longer a source of shame. It was a catalyst. Her aunt, Clara, had found her crying that night, the stained uniform balled in her fists. Clara hadn't offered empty comfort. She'd handed Ilara a stack of old, leather-bound journals. "Your grandmother's," she'd said. The world didn't want to hear her stories either, so she wrote them down. Now you sing them. Ilara opened one now. The pages were filled with the elegant, looping script of a woman who had worked as a maid her whole life, her dreams pressed flat between the pages. Stories of love deferred, of disrespect swallowed, of a spirit that remained unbroken. One line leaped out at Ilara. "They look at me and see a uniform. They never see the galaxy I hold inside." A melody began to form in her mind, a low, haunting progression on the piano. The words of her grandmother merged with her own experience on the cold marble floor. The song began as a whisper, then grew into a storm. It was a lament, a prayer, and a battle cry all at once. She sang until her throat was raw, until the ghost of the champagne was washed away by the sweat of her own truth. When she finished, the basement was silent, but her heart was thunderous. She had it. The song, the one that would change everything. But a terrifying question formed in the wake of a creative fury. How could she present this raw piece of her soul to a world that had already proven it would rather look away? How could she make them hear the galaxy when all they were conditioned to see was a uniform? The answer came not as a thought, but as a vision. The mask, not to hide, but to force them to see. To strip away their prejudices of race and class, to remove every distraction. So the only thing left was a pure, unadulterated voice. It was a radical, terrifying gamble. But was any great revolution born from a place of safety? The mask was porcelain, cool and smooth against her skin. It covered her from hairline to upper lip, leaving only her mouth and jaw exposed, the instruments of her delivery. In the reflection of a dimly lit bathroom mirror, she was no longer a Laura. She was a vessel, a silhouette, a question mark. She had chosen the name Siren with bitter irony. Let them be lured by the voice. Let them crash upon the rocks of their own assumptions. Her first performance was at a grimy, underground open MIC night. The host, a skeptical man with a tired beard, had scoffed. A mask? Honey, this ain't a costume party. But the rules were simple. No names, just talent. When she stepped onto the small, beer-stained stage, a few drunken heckles echoed in the room. She ignored them, placing her hands on the keyboard she brought. She took a breath and began to sing. It was a song born in the basement, the one forged from her grandmother's words in Isabella Thorne champagne. The room did not fall silent gradually. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound out of it. The hecklers' mouths hung open, their jeers frozen. The clinking of bottles ceased. They were not just hearing a beautiful voice. They were witnessing an unmooring. Her voice cracked with a pain that felt ancestral, then swelled with a power that felt divine. When the last note faded, the silence was heavier, more profound than any applause. Then it erupted, a roar of shock and approval. People were on their feet, their faces a canvas of confusion and awe. They had come to see freaks and instead found a prophet. The host rushed over, his skepticism replaced by a frantic energy. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling. Ilara simply smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of her lips below the porcelain. She packed her keyboard and walked out, leaving the room buzzing with a single, unanswerable question. The siren had sung her first song, and the hunt for the woman behind the mask had begun. But what none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly fathom, was that the woman they were so desperate to find was the same one they would have dismissed without a second glance just weeks before. The video, shot on a shaky, low-light phone camera, went viral. Mystery Songstress Stuns Underground Club, the headline read. The comments were a wildfire of speculation. Is it a famous singer trying a new persona? The emotion is unreal. Who is she? The mask is creepy, but that voice. Ilara watched it from the public library computer, a strange detachment settling over her. They were building the myth for her. Every share, every comment, was another brick in the fortress of her anonymity. Her Aunt Clara, now her sole confidant and manager, secured her more gigs. Each one was a step up, from the grimy club to a respected music hall, then to a primetime televised talent competition, Star Search. The producers of Star Search were ecstatic and exasperated. The gimmick is gold, one said over the phone to Clara. But we need to know who she is. Contract liability. Clara, a former union negotiator, was unmoved. The mask is non-negotiable, she stated, her voice calm but ironclad. The voice is the product. Take it or leave it. They took it. The public demand was too great. Ilara, now Siren, became a national phenomenon. Week after week, she would appear, a silent, masked figure who would then shatter the silence with a voice that seemed to speak directly to the secret hurts and hopes of millions. She sang of injustice, of resilience, of a love that was more action than emotion. The judges were mesmerized. "You make me forget I'm judging a competition," one said, her eyes glistening. "I feel like I'm being given a lesson in the human condition." Isabella Thorne, watching from her penthouse, would scoff and change the channel. She found the whole spectacle pretentious. Yet she could never quite make it through the entire performance without a strange, unsettled feeling in her gut. There was something familiar in the anguish, but that was impossible. She'd never associated with people who had such raw talent. It was undignified. Little did she know, the very source of that anguish was a woman she'd once reduced to a stain on her floor. The letter arrived on thick, cream-colored stock, embossed with a familiar, intimidating crest, the Thorne family seal. Ilara's blood ran cold as Clara read it aloud. It was an invitation, not for Ilara the server, but for Siren the phenomenon. The Thorne Foundation for the Arts, Clara read, her voice tight with irony, cordially request the honor of Siren's presence at our annual Diamond Gala, where we will be presenting our future The Arts Grant. The grant was a life-changing sum of money, enough to fund an entire album, a tour, a career. The catch? The primary donor and chair of the selection committee was none other than Isabella Thorne. Ilara stared at the mask on her dresser. To walk back into that house, the scene of her deepest humiliation, not as a servant, but as a coveted guest? The poetic justice was almost too perfect. It was also a trap of unimaginable psychological cruelty. "We can't," Ilara whispered, the memory of the cold champagne a fresh brand. "We must," Clara countered, her eyes blazing. "This is a reckoning, child, not with violence, but with grace, with your gift. You walk in there, you let them fawn over you, and you win their money to fund the art they tried to stifle. You turn their own weapon into your tool." The plan was audacious. It was dangerous. It required a level of emotional fortitude Ilara wasn't sure she possessed. To stand feet away from Isabella, to have her pour praise and money onto Siren, all while being completely unaware that she was redeeming the very woman she'd destroyed. But what if the mask slipped? What if Isabella, in some horrifying moment of clarity, looked at the one part of her that was visible, her mouth, the shape of her jaw, and remembered the quiet, proud service she'd once drenched in contempt? The Thorne estate was exactly as she remembered it, a palace of cold, hard beauty. But this time she did not enter through the service entrance. She walked through the grand, double-height front doors on the arm of her aunt. She was Siren. A hush fell over the glittering crowd. Whispers slithered through the air like snakes. "It's a Siren. My God, the mask." Cameras flashed, a constellation of light against a porcelain shield. She was a center of attention, the most desired mystery in the room. And then she saw her, Isabella Thorne, gliding through the crowd in a gown that cost more than Ilara's childhood home. A practiced, polished smile was on her face as she approached. "Siren," Isabella purred, her voice dripping with a false, proprietary warmth. "We are so honored you could grace us with your presence. Your artistry is a revelation." She extended a hand, bedecked with diamonds, the same hand that had held the champagne flute. Ilara, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, reached out and took it. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt of pure, undiluted history through her. Isabella's smile didn't waver, but her eyes held a flicker of something. Not recognition, but a strange, unsettled confusion. She was searching the sliver of visible face, trying to solve the puzzle. "Your foundation does important work," Ilara said, her voice modulated, lower and softer than her natural speaking tone. It was the first time Isabella had heard Siren's speaking voice. Isabella's smile tightened. "We try to support true talent," she said, her gaze lingering a moment too long on Ilara's mouth, "wherever it may be found." She moved on to greet other guests, but she glanced back twice. The seed was planted, a tiny, nagging doubt in the mind of a woman who was not used to being uncertain about anything. The evening was a success, a whirlwind of curated conversation and veiled inquiries about her identity. Ilara played her part perfectly, the enigmatic artist. But as she was leaving, the event manager, the same one who had hissed at her to be invisible, rushed over to hand her a forgotten wrap. "Yo, scarf," he said, his eyes downcast, servile. He looked directly at her for a split second, and in his eyes there was nothing, no spark of memory. To him, Siren was royalty. Ilara had been furniture. The two were irreconcilable. She took the scarf, her hand steady, but her soul was trembling. The line she was walking was thinner than she thought. How long could she keep these two worlds from violently, catastrophically colliding? Weeks later, the announcement came. Siren had not only won the Thorne Foundation grant, She had been nominated for the prestigious nationally televised Aurora Award for Artistic Innovation, the highest honor for an emerging artist. The news was everywhere. Siren was no longer a viral sensation. She was a cultural force. The Aurora Awards were the pinnacle. They were to be held at the Grand Opera House, broadcast live to millions. The other nominees were industry giants, household names. And Siren, the mystery, was among them. The pressure was immense. The public and the press were in a frenzy, desperate to unveil the woman behind the myth before the big night. Paparazzi camped outside Clara's modest home. Tabloids offered staggering sums for a single unmasked photograph. Isabella Thorne, as a major donor to the arts and a member of the cultural elite, would be there, of course, seated in the front row. She gave interviews, praising Siren's raw, untamed genius, seamlessly positioning herself as a patron who had recognized the talent early. The hypocrisy was a pill Laura struggled to swallow. This woman was building her public reputation on the back of the very artist she had personally tried to crush. The night of the awards arrived. Ilara stood in a secluded antechamber, the porcelain mask feeling heavier than ever. It was no longer just a shield. It was a crown of thorns. She could hear the muffled sounds of the orchestra, the murmur of the black-tie audience. In a few moments, she would walk out onto that stage, either as a winner, forever cementing her legend, or as a loser, allowing the world to potentially dismiss her as a fleeting gimmick. Clara squeezed her hand. "No matter what happens out there," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you have already won. You made them listen." But Ilara knew that wasn't entirely true. There was one final part of the victory that remained. A victory not just over the industry, but over the specific, personal poison that Isabella Thorne represented. Was the world ready for the truth that lay beneath the porcelain? Was she? The walk to the stage was a blur of lights and deafening applause. Ilara, as Siren, took her seat among the other nominees. She could feel Isabella's gaze from the front row, sharp and analytical, like a surgeon's scalpel. The category for artistic innovation was next. And the winner is, the presenter, a legendary actor, dragged out the pause for what felt like an eternity. The cameras cut to the nominees' faces. When they landed on Siren's mask, the audience held its breath. Siren! The world erupted in sound. Ilara's legs felt like water. This was it, the moment of supreme triumph. She walked to the podium, the heavy Aurora statuette placed in her hands. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the cameras broadcasting her masked image across the nation. She saw Isabella Thorne, clapping, a proud, proprietary smile on her lips. The host approached, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Siren, an incredible honor. Your voice has moved a nation. But surely, on a night like this, a night of such authentic celebration, you'll give the people what they want? Who is the woman behind the mask?" The question hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in a request. The audience fell into an anticipatory silence. This was the moment every single person had been waiting for. The great unveiling, the mystery solved. Isabella Thorne leaned forward, her smile fixed, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of being among the first to know the secret. Ilara turned to the microphone. Her heart was not just beating, it was roaring. She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed a graceful, enigmatic refusal. But as she looked at Isabella, at the sheer, unknown comfort in her expression, the words dried up. A more powerful, more dangerous truth demanded to be spoken. "You ask who I am," Ilara began, her voice, Siren's voice, clear and resonant through the speakers. It was not the soft, modulated tone she'd used at the gala. It was a real voice, laced with a newfound, unshakable power. "For 2 years, you have listened to my heart. You've heard my stories of pain, of resilience, of a love that fights to survive. You've called my voice authentic, raw, real." She paused, letting the words settle over the confused audience. This was not the speech they expected. "The mask," she continued, lifting the statuette, "was never a gimmick. It was a necessity. It was the only way to make you hear me. Because without it, you would have seen me. And what you see, you have been taught to dismiss." A nervous ripple went through the crowd. Isabella's smile had begun to falter, replaced by a deepening frown. That voice, it was now scratching at a door in her memory. "This award," Ilara said, her gaze sweeping the room before landing, with laser focus on Isabella Thorne, is not just for me. It is for every voice that has been told to be quiet, for every story that has been deemed unworthy, for every dream that has been spilled on the floor and treated as a stain. The word stain hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face. The memory, long buried under layers of privilege, erupted to the surface. The champagne, the server, the kneeling figure, the proud, hurt eyes that had met hers for a fleeting second. Ilara saw the dawning horror in Isabella's eyes. The recognition was complete, and in that moment, Ilara made her choice. She reached up, her fingers finding the smooth edges of the porcelain. The audience gasped as one. This was it, the reveal, but she didn't take it off. Not yet. She held it there, her fingers poised. You wanted to know who the woman behind the mask is, she asked, her voice dropping to a devastating whisper. She is the one you walk past every day. She is the one you refuse to see. She is the ghost in your house and the angel in your ears. And tonight you will finally look at her. The silence in the opera house was absolute, a vacuum of breath and sound. Every person was frozen, suspended in the unbearable tension of the moment. What face would be revealed? And what would it mean for the woman in the front row, whose world was already beginning to shatter? With a slow, deliberate movement, Ilara unclasped the mask. She did not rip it off like a bandage, but lifted it away from her face with a kind of sacred ceremony, placing it gently on the podium next to the Aurora Award. There was no collective gasp. The revelation was too profound, too shocking for sound. The audience saw a beautiful, composed black woman, her eyes holding a storm of history and hard-won peace. They saw Ilara, but the camera, directed by some divine instinct, stayed on Isabella Thorne. The live broadcast captured every micro-expression that shattered her polished facade, the disbelief, the dawning comprehension, the swift, brutal flood of shame. She saw the server, the woman she had humiliated, the woman whose art she had later championed, the woman whose victory was her own utter, public annihilation. She shrank in her seat, trying to become one with the velvet, but the camera's eye was unrelenting. Ilara looked directly into the lens, her voice calm, clear, and imbued with an authority that could not be questioned. My name is Ilara. I am a singer, a storyteller, a dreamer, and I no longer need a mask for you to hear me. She picked up her award, leaving the porcelain mask behind on the podium, an empty shell, its purpose served. She walked up the stage, not as a mystery, but as a fully realized, triumphant woman. The applause started then, hesitant at first, then building into a thunderous, roaring wave that was not just for the artist, but for the truth she had just unleashed upon the world. Backstage was chaos. Reporters shouted questions, but Ilara, guided by Clara, moved through them like a queen. She had said all she needed to say. The victory was complete. But as she stepped into the waiting car, a final, haunting question lingered in the air, a question for the audience, for Isabella, for the world. What do you do when the ghost you created returns to claim its throne? The world exploded. #Siren Unmasked and #Ilara trended globally within minutes. The video of the unveiling was replayed billions of times. It wasn't just a celebrity reveal. It was a cultural earthquake. News outlets scrambled to piece together her story, the talented, unknown artist working as a server, the humiliation of the Thorne Gala, the 2-year rise under mask. Isabella Thorne became the villain of the piece. The image of her face, frozen in horrified recognition, became a meme, a symbol of a corrupt system being exposed. The Thorne Foundation was inundated with accusations of hypocrisy. Major donors pulled their funding. The future of the art grant was now a monument to their own myopia. Ilara, however, retreated from the spotlight. She and Clara turned off their phones and stayed in a quiet, private location. The victory was sweet, but the exposure was exhausting. For 2 years, she had controlled her narrative from behind the porcelain. Now, her story was being written by everyone. She had wanted to be seen, but was the world truly seeing her, or just a new, more compelling story? She spent her days reading the letters that poured in, not from fans, but from people. Young black girls who said she made them feel proud. Servers, janitors, and cashiers who wrote that they now walked a little taller, their invisible work feeling suddenly visible and dignified. Her victory was not just her own. It had become a vessel for the hopes of millions of the unseen. But with this new role came a weight she had never anticipated. Could a single woman carry the dreams of so many? A week after the awards, a single plain envelope arrived, hand-delivered to Clara's home. There was no return address, but the paper was the same thick, expensive stock as a gala invitation. Clara handed it to Elara with a wary expression. Inside was a letter written in a shaky, unpracticed hand. It was from Isabella Thorne. Elara, I will not insult you with an apology. There are no words sufficient for the ugliness of my actions at night, or for the blindness of my privilege that allowed me to forget it so easily. I watched you unmask yourself, and in that moment, I was the one who was made invisible. I saw the nothingness of my own character that I am resigning from the foundation. The grant money you won is yours, free and clear, but I am liquidating a portion of my personal assets to create a new fund in your name, the Elara Fund, to be directed by you and your aunt to support artists from marginalized communities who, like you, should never need a mask to be heard. This is not an attempt to buy forgiveness. It is an attempt, however feeble, to begin to repair a crack in the world that I helped to create. I saw the galaxy in your voice long before I knew it was you. I just didn't have the eyes to see it in your face. Isabella. Elara read the letter 3 times. The rage she had carried for so long did not vanish, but it shifted. It meant something new, the raw, unvarnished truth of a woman whose entire identity had been shattered. There was no manipulation here, only a profound and devastating humility. Isabella was not asking for redemption. She was stating a fact of her own moral bankruptcy. Clara read it over her shoulder. It's a start, she said, her voice neutral. But it doesn't change what she did. Elara looked up, her eyes clear. No, she agreed softly. But it changes what happens next. The question was, what would Elara do with this unexpected, complicated offering? Would she allow the woman who wronged her to become a part of her legacy? Elara agreed to one interview with a respected black journalist known for her thoughtful, in-depth conversations. They sat in a sunlit studio, a world away from the drama of the award stage. The mask, the journalist began. You said it was a necessity. Do you think, in a just world, you would have needed it? Elara smiled, a real, weary, wise smile. In a just world, my grandmother's journals would be on a bestseller list. No, I shouldn't have needed it. But the world isn't just, so I used the injustice as my raw material. The mask was my filter. It forced people to listen with their souls, not their prejudices. They discussed a letter from Isabella. Many are calling it a coerced act of public relations. What is your response? Elara leaned forward. I thought that, too, at first. But redemption isn't something you grant. It's something you build, brick by brick, with painful, consistent action. She is handing me the bricks. What I choose to build with them is my power. Anger is a fuel, but it's a destructive one. I want to build something that lasts. The most powerful moment came at the end. What would you say, the journalist asked softly, to the Elara of 2 years ago, kneeling on that floor? Elara looked directly into the camera, her eyes glistening but her voice steady. I would say, get up. The stain isn't on you. It's on them, and that stain will become your signature. The line was so profound, so poetic, it would be quoted and shared for years to come. It was the ultimate moral reversal. But had Elara truly forgiven, or was she simply architecting a more profound and lasting victory? A year later, the Elara Fund had already launched the careers of a dozen incredible artists, a disabled filmmaker, a transgender playwright, a poet from the inner city. They were diverse, brilliant, and unapologetically themselves. Elara, now a respected industry leader in her own right, oversaw it all with Clara. She had released her debut album, Galaxy, to critical acclaim. It opened with the sound of clinking glasses and a falling champagne flute, sampled and distorted into a haunting rhythm. Isabella Thorne, true to her word, had faded from public life. She attended fund meetings remotely, her contributions financial and logistical, but she never imposed her will. She was learning to listen. One day, a handwritten note from her arrived at Elara's office with a proposal for a new community art center. The idea was thoughtful, well-researched, and utterly selfless. Ilara approved it with a single word: yes. There was no friendship between them, nor did there need to be. There was, instead, a quiet understanding. A broken thing had been repaired, not to its original state, but into something new and stronger. The oppressor had been redeemed not by the oppressed, but by being forced to witness her own reflection in the masterpiece she had tried to destroy. But could this fragile peace last, or was the past destined to forever shadow the future? Ilara stood backstage at the very same Grand Opera House. It was the first anniversary of her Aurora Award win, and she was headlining a sold-out benefit concert for the Ilara Fund. She no longer felt like a fraud or a ghost. She felt, simply, like herself. Before walking on stage, she opened the small, velvet-lined box she always carried with her. Inside, nestled against the soft fabric, was a porcelain mask. It was no longer a tool or a weapon. It was a relic, a reminder of a journey. She walked onto the stage to a standing ovation. She smiled, a genuine, open smile, and bowed. The stage lights were warm. The audience's love was palpable. She approached the microphone, no shield between her and the world. "Thank you," she said, her voice echoing freely through the hall, "for listening." She began to sing, the first song from her album, the one born in the basement. Her voice, Ilara's voice, filled the space, a sound of pain transformed into power, of humiliation alchemized into grace. In the very back of the auditorium, shrouded in shadow, a figure watched. Isabella Thorne allowed the music to wash over her, each note a balm and a lesson. She did not clap when the song ended. She simply placed a hand over her heart and bowed her head. Ilara finished her set and took a final bow, the applause washing over her like a blessing. She looked out at the thousands of faces, seeing them clearly, allowing herself to be seen. The cycle was complete. She had started as a woman they refused to see, became a mystery they were desperate to solve, and ended as a truth they could no longer ignore. The final, haunting words she left them were these: "The most powerful mask you can ever wear is your own face, unafraid." If this story moved you, if it made you feel that rage, that heartbreak, that ultimate satisfaction, you cannot miss what comes next. Do not let the algorithm hide our stories from you. Subscribe right now. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of a comeback. And most importantly, click the video you see on your screen right now, or the one we've linked in the description. Trust me, you will not regret it. The next chapter is waiting, and it's more than you can possibly imagine. See you there.